Welcome back to part 3 of our series on creating a TV watch list application in Symfony. In part 1, we created a Symfony application. In part 2, we added a user account so we can now log into our system as our admin user. And we're ready to start adding the pieces we need to build the TV watch list. So I took a little bit of time planning this project, and I came up with 3 entity types we're going to use. I'm going to talk about a 4th entity type, but we're not necessarily going to include that in our project. The first we've already created is the user, and the only things that I have included in this user entity are an ID, username, password, and role. These are the default 4. You need some kind of identifier, string identifier, either a username or an email for Symfony. We chose username in part 2 of this series. You can add a first name, last name, any information, email address, any information you'd want to add to this application on your own. That's not really the point of this application, is to work out every possible detail here, but just to do a quick startup. The next thing we want to be able to track for each of the shows that we're tracking, we want to attach that to a user, but we also want to attach it to a streaming platform. And so I've just got a real simple entity type here of a platform that has ID. Basically, all of your Symfony entity types are going to have an auto-incrementing ID number and then a name for that platform. Again, there is any number of things that you could add to this project from here, but those are the bare minimums that we need to be able to list which streaming platform we're using for each show. And then again, bare minimum definition of the show. We've got our ID, the show title, the streaming platform that it's on, the user that listed this show, and a rating, which we will be able to put in a number between 1 and 5, at least as a starting point. Now, I do want to talk about this a little bit as far as architecture and design goes for a more advanced project where you'd have multiple users all listing similar shows. You could definitely add more to this. You could have the show just be the information about a show and not include the rating, and then each individual user could take these shows and add listings for their shows. So in that case, you'd have an ID, the user, the show, the rating, and then possibly even another field that links to all your friends. That's an idea for you if you decide that you like this project and want to develop it further on your own. Hopefully, I will show you enough in this series that you'll be able to add that kind of feature and functionality if you want to, but we're going to keep it simple here. So the first thing we're going to do is jump in and add our platform entity type. So we flip over, I've got everything running, I'm logged in as admin, and I've got Docker running. I just want to do a quick check. It's always a good idea when you haven't worked on a project in a while. Let's jump in, and I'm just going to check real quick here. Just do a git status check on my repository. It's clean. It might be a good idea to check for outdated things, see if you need to do an update. We can run composer outdated, and we can see what packages might be outdated in our application. And there definitely are some here, so I'm going to go ahead and do this right now. It's usually a good idea to do a dry run first to see which things will be updated. So we'll do a composer update. We'll include all dependencies, and which is probably redundant since we didn't specify what we want to update. And we'll do a dry run to see what it says we need to load. And here's the list. I don't see anything on here that looks like it could be problematic, so I'm going to go ahead and do the update. Once the update is complete, I'm going to run git status. Normally, the only thing that has changed is composer.lock. Sometimes symfony.lock will also change. And so we'll now do a commit. And I'm just going to note that I've updated third-party dependencies because I didn't actually update Symfony itself. So now we're ready to go. And just to remind myself, we're going to create a platform that just simply has an ID and a name. So we're going to use bin console again. We're going to make entity. And if you don't specify one on the command line here, it will prompt you for one. It'll give you an example default. This is a platform. And we're going to add a property of name. And that is a string. And we'll take the default field length size. If you want this to be an index field, then you should probably reduce this down to 180 characters because of 4-byte characters. So let's do that. We'll go down to 180 characters. This field cannot be null in the database, and we don't need any more properties. So I'm going to hit enter. If we do, we can just come back and run make entity on this entity again, and it will update. Let's go take a look at our code and see what got added here. So this is going to be in source entity, where our user already was. Here's our platform. And so we have our properties here. We have our ID and our name, and the getter for the ID, and the getter and the setter for name. And that's all we need for this. Let's go ahead and jump back in, and we're going to now make the database migration so that this will get populated to the database. And this runs. And again, now we have one with today's date, and we can go look at that migration. The second one here. Again, optionally, if you want, go ahead and clean up this code. Make it a little neater. And if we run the migration up, it's going to create the table for platform. And if we run back down, reverse it, it would drop the table for platform. Let's go ahead and run that just to make sure everything goes smoothly. Run the migrate, and it ran. And if we want to see our migrations, again, we can do list. Shows that everything has migrated. Launch our phpMyAdmin and take a look in our app database. And here now we have the table for platform. And I'm going to go ahead, just because I want to quickly demonstrate how everything works in this application. And I'm going to go ahead and insert a record here, and I'm going to add Netflix as our first streaming provider. And so now if I browse that table, I have a record here with Netflix, and we can add more, but I just want to make sure we have at least one platform in here so that we can demonstrate output before we actually get into dealing with input. Again, we've added files, so we will add those and commit, just so that we have a good, clean commit log. And then now we can go ahead and add our entity for show. And so this time I'll just go ahead and specify that right here on the command line, make entity show. And let's see what our properties need to be. And so we have ID, title, platform, user, and rating. So ID got made for us automatically. We're going to add title now. And again, that's a string. For indexing, we should probably go with 180 characters. That cannot be null. And now this gets a little more interesting, because this is where we're going to start talking about relationships. And in order to relate tables to each other, we want to use doctrine associations. So you might want to jump in and take a look at the documentation for doctrine associations in Symfony. And the thing that you want to really understand here is the many-to-one and the one-to-many association. Every time I stop to think about which way this needs to work, I just literally do this in my mind and say, we're doing shows. So, if each user can list many shows, then there are many shows to one user. Again, I don't want to get into the more advanced ways we could set this up. Our point here is that each user can add their shows, so there will be many shows for each one user. So we need a many-to-one relationship now, but from show to user. And so when we say user here, this is many. If you just start typing, you'll get many to one, and it will fill this all in for you. So this is related to the user class. And is the show user allowed to be null? No, we always want to make sure that a show is related to a user. And do you want to add a new property to user so that you can access show from it by saying user get shows? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. That's kind of the point of what we're doing here. And so now we need a new field name inside of users. So you notice that we've been using singular for most things here, but now we could have many shows to one user. So it is appropriate that our field name be shows plural in the user table. And yes, we actually do, if we were to delete the user, we would want to delete all of the shows for that user. So we're going to answer yes here also. Now we have a similar thing in that we want to relate our show to a platform. And we can have many shows to one platform. So again, this will be a many-to-one. Enter the property name, and the property name will be platform. And it is also a many-to-one. This relates to platform. It is allowed to be null. No, we need to be able to list every platform that we're going to have shows on. Yes, we may not need this, but I have found that when I first started working with these relationships, almost every time I said, I don't need a reverse relationship on this, I was wrong. So let's go ahead and say yes here, even though we may not use it. And again, from platform, we're going to reference shows, plural, so that's fine. And this time, no, we definitely don't want to orphan things because a show can change. A show could change from one platform to another. It happens all the time. So we definitely don't want to automatically delete anything in this case. And then the last property we want to add is just our user's rating. And so this is going to be rating. And this is going to be an integer. And can this field be null in the database? Probably yes, but let's go ahead and make them rate. Actually, yes, I'm going to say that people do not have to rate their shows if they don't want to. So yes, this can be null in the database. And that's it. We don't need to add any more properties. So what do we have here? We now have an entity for show that has all of the columns that we've added to it and specified. But we show that the platform entity has changed and the user entity has changed. So the user entity has changed because we've added a collection, shows, and here are our settings for the target entity, what it's mapped by, and how we answered the question about orphan removal. And then down here at the bottom, now we have the getters and setters to add and remove shows from users. And we have the same thing in platform. We now have a collection of shows in platform with the setters and getters. It's very unlikely that we'll use these here, but it's not going to hurt anything to have them. So let's go ahead and leave them alone. So we go ahead and add and commit. And I'm going to reuse what I typed before. But I forgot a step. I forgot to do the migration. It's very easy to forget when you get excited and think you're moving ahead here. So let's go ahead and make our migration. And let's see what changes it made this time. So here's our third migration. And I've started doing this, so let's go ahead and finish. Because this is interesting now, we have some other indexes. We have indexes on our user ID and our platform ID. And then we have some alter tables here. We have an alter table in show, and that's going to add a constraint. And we have an alter table. And then so after the table is created, we're adding 2 foreign key constraints to the user, one for the user table and one for the platform. So let's go ahead and run that migration now. And when we come back, we should now have a table for show. And let's go ahead and insert a show for this. So my user ID is user1 admin, my platform is platform1 Netflix. We'll go ahead and add the Umbrella Academy because it's the last thing I wrote. I watched, and on a scale of 1 to 5, I think I'll go ahead and give that a 5. And just the purpose for that, again, is just so that I can quickly get in and demonstrate how we're going to get information back out of this system and how these relationships work. So now we'll do a get status. And here's the migration I forgot to add, so let's add it. And then we're going to, because I want that in the same commit, and I haven't pushed this anywhere yet, so I can git commit amend, no edit. And now we've changed history so that that commit includes all the files that we need to add a show. And we'll just do a little refresher here. These are the steps that we've done so far in our project. Now that we've added all of our entity types, in the next video, I'll demonstrate how to get this information back out of your website.